We will definitely cover hosting services. Again, in this session, I'm going to talk about my own experiences and examples. I have used two over the life of Self-Made Strategies. Now with my clients, I continue to use the same one that I use for Self-Made Strategies, but that's out of personal preference, and you'll have to find the one that works best for you as well. In terms of designing your site, I have found fairly good success on Fiverr, just hiring someone to do a podcast website or help to set up your podcast or revamp your website. And you can usually, read the reviews. It's like buying anything else online, except that you're buying services. But read the reviews, make sure that these people are relatively reliable, have pretty good reviews. You could probably find someone to set up a, generally speaking, nice looking, but relatively basic, just blog type of website where you post your episodes to, much like what I do with Self-Made Strategies, at a reasonable rate. So you shouldn't have to invest a ton of money on the technology aspects of your website. From a hosting perspective, I can tell you I have a fairly premium plan because I host a variety of podcasts on my network, within my network. So I have a more robust hosting plan. But on average, you can expect, I would say it's an average, but it's a very likely sort of floor of a number. You can expect to pay around $480 per year for hosting your podcast. So usually around something like $40 a month on average, something like that. And there may be like a $40 setup fee and maybe free. Now that number fluctuates a little bit here and there. That's a fairly premium package. That's a reliable package, but it is something, again, that you want to consider investing the money in. That's annual investment of $480 a year. So it's not brutally expensive over the life of it. Can you expect to make that money back? Which may be a question that some of you may have in your mind. Monetization of a podcast show, especially early on, is very, very difficult unless you already have a very large following or some sponsorships. So if you're in a nonprofit, you have trustees, you have sponsors, go to them and say, hey, we're building this additional engagement tool, and this is how much money we need. Set up a proper budget. You probably need more than you think you do, because you may need to hire talent to help. So maybe give yourself a bit of a cushion and say, look, you'll get some advertising on the podcast, sell a season, for example. That's a better strategy that was given to me by the CEO of blueberry.com, which is the hosting platform that I use. And I don't get any kickbacks or skin in the game for that, but he was on my show. And that was one of the tips that he gave me. And that was, we want to sell advertising or sponsorships in sort of seasons rather than by the listener, especially early on. That way you do some risk sharing. Honestly, the risk is probably more on the advertiser than it is for you early on. But you can sort of spread the risk a little bit and get some support. You can also set up a Patreon account, which is kind of like a Kickstarter. Okay. A Kickstarter type of account where people can give you sort of a monthly nominal amount to support your show. So you can ask your fans for $1 or something like that. I did see a question pop up in the chat just now about what a reasonable budget would be. So you're looking at roughly $480 per year for any one podcast show to be hosted. And that's not really variable in the sense that, let's say you post 10 episodes and then you stop for several months. If you want it to be hosted and live to live on the internet or on your website, you still do have to pay that monthly hosting fee or an annual amount, whatever deal you have with your hosting service provider. Obviously, your equipment is a fixed cost as a part of this. And I say fixed cost in air quotes because myself, I didn't start out with the top of the line Shure microphones and all of that stuff. And although I've made good recommendations for midpoints to start, and if you buy midpoint style of equipment, that's probably going to last you a lot longer. I upgraded multiple times because I wanted to improve the quality, and also because we were, as you all know, providing that service to people who needed, nonprofits who needed, or people who needed help starting their own podcast show. So we needed better equipment. So it's a fixed cost, though, most likely for the first 50 to 100 episodes. If you buy one of the microphones that I suggested, you're probably going to be in pretty good shape, especially if you buy the mid-range one. So you have to budget that in. And then you need to budget for potential for an editor. Maybe you need to hire a social media person to really help you get some organic traction with this. Be careful who you're hiring. Hire people that have experience in the space. Maybe ask to see, what podcasts have they worked on? What type of work do they do? What type of equipment do they use? I think that's a fair question. What's their availability and capacity? Do they have a team, or is it a one person, kind of run and gun type of thing? That's not necessarily bad, but just make sure you have very, very transparent communication. Also talk a lot about deadlines. I will tell you this from experience, because I've had, at this point, a good amount of editors come through. Some are better than others. Some will drive you crazy the night before your episode is supposed to launch. In my case, I launch an episode a week. That, I will say, is a very difficult thing to keep at pace for a long haul. I've done it for 141 episodes at this point, if I'm not mistaken. And it's extremely difficult, very, very difficult. And there are nights and weekends before an episode is supposed to go live that can be very stressful if your team is not meeting the deadlines that you want. And the best suggestion that I can really give, and I have not necessarily followed my own advice in this case, is to get as far ahead as you can, meaning edit episodes well out in advance so that you give yourself a little bit of lead time. Now, the problem is you give yourself lead time and sometimes you get a little bit too complacent or relaxed, and that lead time catches up to you. And the next thing you know, you're blindsided and you have to scramble to try to get the episode out in time. I've been very fortunate that I haven't missed a beat yet, knock on wood. But at times I have jumped in. I have edited, I will be honest with this group, I have edited episodes at 3 a.m. the night before it was supposed to go, or the morning of it's supposed to go live, to get an episode out, because I was busy with my legal practice. I can't obviously drop the ball on any of that stuff. And that was when I had the time, unfortunately. So there haven't been an incredibly large percentage amount of those, but those have happened. And so that does happen. I do see another question about a good amount to charge advertisers. As much as you can get is the answer to that question. So I would say you probably want to start at no less than about $1,000 per season per advertiser. No less, no matter how small the show. Now, mind you, to go to an advertiser and pitch them on your show, you should be following a lot of the things that we've talked about in this session, meaning you should have a really solid idea of what the show looks like. You should have guests lined up or already recorded. You should have samples of what this is going to look like. If you're working with a production team, when we work with our nonprofits that we support, we prepare buzz reels for them. So we'll prepare basically a highlight reel, if you will, buzz reel, whatever you want to call it. That's essentially like a trailer for the upcoming season. And it has, clips, it's a little faster paced, it's got some music, maybe a little bit of voiceover. And it's something that you can send not only in pre-marketing the show, but you can also send it to potential advertisers, sponsors, supporters, stakeholders, whoever those individuals or organizations are, and say, this is what we have coming up that we're using as a tool for engaging with our customers, donors, the stakeholders that we support. Here's how you can get involved. You can support us by, and maybe you set up 3 different tiers of flat fee advertisement / sponsorship. Maybe you want to call it a sponsorship rather than an advertisement. Although you want to give them their best bang for the buck. They'll be mentioned on the social posts. Their logo will be on screen the whole time. Maybe, offer different tiers. Maybe one has a quick 30-second pre-roll, right? Little ad speak at the beginning of each episode, and they get mentioned on your website for the first tier. The second tier might be their logos in the corner of the screen over here, where the whole time that the episode is running, their logo's down there, and we say a thank you to them, and we do an end roll or a mid roll or whatever. And then the top tier, give them the on-screen, et cetera, and a card, meaning and their logo at the end and beginning. Give them bells and whistles, make it worth their while, give them a lot of value. In terms of, there's a question in the chat about recommendations on podcast websites that represent best practices. So I use, let's dive into some of this content so that we don't get bogged down, because that'll kind of bring some of that up. I use Blueberry, which we'll get to in a second, as a hosting provider. And Blueberry provides a lot of weekly, monthly tips and tricks, podcasts of their own with advice about how to improve your podcast. So Blueberry is a really good resource. And they also have, I believe, an encyclopedia, so to speak, of links and information that is really good, very robust, and comes from a very reliable and well-experienced source that you can use to improve your content. Honestly, though, Googling and going to trusted resources about those things, right? I follow an account, no affiliation of my own, but I follow an account, I believe it's called Poddex, Decks, Dex, which is a company that sells cards that give you suggestions on questions to ask your guests or to kind of spice up your podcast. And he provides really good tips. I like his content on Instagram all the time. So you might want to check that account out and follow that for good weekly tips. Usually his tips are about all things related to podcasting for sure, but mainly about, content marketing and kind of organic reach with your target audience. So really good, robust content. Those would be my main recommendations outside of just Googling and then being smart about your Googling, right? Really making sure that, am I reading something that's just clickbait in the list that just regurgitates all of the information that's everywhere else? Or am I reading something that seems thoughtful and a good resource? There are also some really great books out there that you can get in print or Kindle or audiobook available. I listen to them on Audible. Maybe you can find them on Libby for free. That I don't know, but maybe you can. And that is, there's one called Make Noise by Eric Newsom. It's very good. And Eric Newsom worked for NPR, I think, for a very long time and worked in actual terrestrial radio and then helped to develop some really popular podcasts. So that's a very good one. And then there's one called Big Podcast, which I also enjoyed and found to be really useful. Other than that, there are just books on storytelling or good writing that'll help you to develop good habits. Now I'm getting a little bit into my own process. I like to listen to a lot of things in even tangential or outside of the space to kind of really pick up as much information as possible. But those two books are really, really good. Again, no skin in the game, no affiliation for me. They've just been helpful to me in my process. And of course, you can always email me, reach out to me. I'm happy to have a 30-minute phone call with anyone who needs a little bit of guidance on something. Okay, so distribution. And please, by the way, keep the questions coming. Those are great questions. Distribution is all about how to get your podcast distributed, get it out there into the world so that people can find it, people can listen to it, and you, more importantly, can point people to it. I will say that in today's podcast climate, there's still potential room for growth, plenty of it. But you do have to nowadays steer people towards your podcast. Don't expect that you're going to put it out there and people are just going to find it. It's great if they do, but you should be actively trying to kind of funnel people gently towards it, right? And if you've If you've built it for them, as we've been talking about throughout this entire process, they'll come and they'll stay. And that's what you want, okay? Podcasting is very much like YouTube in its inception, in the sense that it's a democratized, meaning low barrier to entry, means of producing really engaging, meaningful, value-based content that can reach people, that can reach communities, target audiences very, very effectively and cheaply, except that with one minor exception, and that is that when YouTube came out and was very early on and just kind of gaining its traction, there wasn't as much competition online for people's attention. And in today's world, obviously, that's completely different, right? You're competing with social media, you're competing with streamers, meaning Netflix, Hulu, HBO Max, et cetera. I mean, there are countless amounts of streamers alone, and even the streamers are starting to get into the podcast space. But it is very similar in the sense that the sky's the limit right now, and we're still very much on the early phases of the bell curve, heading into sort of a big peak in the podcasting space, most likely. So it's an exciting time to be getting into the space, and you should be excited about it because that excitement will come off to your listeners. So what you're trying to distribute to, if you're doing an audio only podcast, you're distributing to these main distribution directories, okay? Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, Podchaser, TuneIn, Pandora, and many, 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 many more. So many right now that it would be pointless to list them because we would be here all night wasting our time just talking about how many there are. Audible is one now. There are so many right now that they're actually now starting to build platforms that actually just aggregate. You don't even have to send it to them. They find your RSS feed and they just aggregate it. They bring it into their platform. With Apple Podcasts, which is still definitely the royalty, I won't say king because I want to stay gender neutral here, the royalty of the podcast space, Apple Podcasts is still the creme de la creme, and you do have to actively send your podcast to Apple. Being on Apple is very important. The others, iHeartRadio is a big competitor in the space now. Spotify is very big. Google is prevalent, but just really has not gained the competitive traction that iHeart and Spotify have, at least to this point. Samsung Podcasts is now also a podcast platform as well. So that'll actually take a little bit of the Android usage away from Google Podcasts. And Apple Podcasts is still the main place where you want to be. So there's a question about if and when you're starting off, how many days or hours should you do for a beginner? Now, I'm assuming you mean how much time per week should you invest into your show as a whole. So if I didn't mention this before, I'll say it now. When you're starting out, you can easily expect to spend 10 hours on average per episode. That number can fluctuate a little bit depending on your propensity for learning and your ability, and everyone is very different. This is not about being smart or any of that. Anyone can do this. I'm confident that anyone here can do it if you believe in yourself. I believe in you. But it's also about, where your strengths are. There are going to be parts of this undoubtedly that you're going to be weaker at, and there are going to be parts of this that you're just going to pick up right away. We've seen it with the students at CollegeCast, and each one of them is different in the sense that one might be really strong that the software just clicks and they get it and they're in there editing right away. Others may be really strong with networking and prospecting people to get on their show, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many parts to this, but I will say that on average, I can tell you with confidence that you're looking at 10 to ballpark 12 hours per episode if you're doing everything yourself. An editor will save you probably 4-ish to 6-ish hours of time early on. So they can be well worth the amount of money that you spend on an editor, okay? If they're good and they reduce your headaches and your stress. Sometimes if you're working with an editor that's always sending you a final episode at the last minute, you don't even have time to review it and make any changes or whatever. That can become very stressful and maybe isn't worth it. So you have to weigh that out for yourself and how hard the editing is. But easily you can expect to spend that amount of time. All right. So how do we get our podcast distributed to all of these directories? And by the way, if you're doing a video and audio podcast, then those directories now include YouTube, Vimeo if you want to, etc. Okay. And I will say this, video is very powerful, especially from the perspective of the organic content marketing on the back end that you're sending out, right? So it is important in my eyes, if you're building a podcast now, to at least strongly consider adding video to it. Audio is much cheaper to produce, but it's also has a higher risk of you maybe getting more complacent and not really getting the total value out of it. So I think with video, the pressure is definitely higher and the learning curve is a bit higher, but the outcome, the ROI that you get on it, your time invested, your efforts invested, is that much exponentially greater. And especially from a content marketing perspective. I'm sure all of you know, if you're on Facebook, if you're on Twitter, if you're on LinkedIn, if you're on Instagram, it doesn't matter where you are now, video is king. You tend to stop scrolling when you get to a video, right? And that's where you get to a situation where you say, oh, I want to stop and see what she has to say because she's on camera and I can see her and there's movement. It just tends to stop us more. Otherwise, you're just scrolling. And don't bother posting audio only snippets on social media. I'm telling you, no one's listening to that. No one is, they're scrolling right by it. Maybe you're getting some likes from your friends and family, which is great, but that amount of investment of time is probably not getting you the returns that you're looking for, okay? So video is, again, speaking of best practices, video is what we want to focus on if we really want to maximize our reach and our bang for our buck. I also want to really emphasize that early on, you have to check your expectations and really keep yourself grounded in the sense that you really need to be grounded in the fact that you're starting out. Your first 10 episodes are about building a community, about showing what you're bringing to the community. Give yourself some time, give yourself some leeway. Don't kill yourself on, oh, only 30 people listen to this episode. That's great. 30 people listen to something that you put out there. That's fantastic. So, be gentle with yourself and know that this is a marathon and not a sprint. There's a question about whether I'm saying that sound bites aren't being consumed. I would say that with relative confidence, depending on what you're calling a soundbite and who we're talking about, that's not going to get us the meaningful engagement that we're considering with this. So if you're comparing a soundbite to a podcast, we're talking about two different things. I don't know what the content is. It's a little bit of a general question, but I would say that you're not getting the consumption and engagement out of a soundbite that you could from a video podcast. Comparing the two, a video is going to crush a mere soundbite. And keep in mind that we're talking about a soundbite on social media, right? So if you're posting a soundbite to social media, you're probably not getting engagement from it. If it's just a soundbite with a picture, or if it's just a soundbite with a logo, people most likely are not stopping scrolling to sit there and listen for 30 seconds. If there's video associated with that soundbite, so it's a video now, that is what's seeing more engagement on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn. You can see that Gary Vee and all of the big experts, Tommy Bilyeu, all of those big people with big followings, they post videos, they don't post sound bites. And they have podcasts, they have large followings. So when we're comparing the two, I'm not saying in a vacuum, will an audio snippet get you 30 likes, great. That's 30 likes. That's fine. But we're not measuring things in that basis. We're looking for real organic engagement. We're looking to build communities, not count up, are we getting a few likes? Are we getting noticed? That's not the objective and the goal that we're going for. Okay. All right. So the hosting platforms, these are sort of the main ones that you'll find. Castos is also today, in today's world, probably a main one also. But again, if I were to sit here and just list all of them, we could be here all day. So you have to decide based on the packages that are offered and what is out there for you, and what they're providing you with as additional value for being a member, for hosting your platform, your podcast here. Which one of these do you prefer? Now, I do use Blueberry. When I started my podcast, Self-Made Strategies, way back a little over 2 years ago, I was using Spreaker. I would say personally, this is just my personal opinion, I like Blueberry better because it has a tool called PowerPress, which allows for WordPress integration. We designed our website for Self-Made Strategies around WordPress. We use PowerPress as a plugin. So I can literally post my episode by creating a blog post, posting the episode to it, and it goes out to my RSS feed and kicks out to all of the distribution channels that I need it to the directories. So I use Blueberry for that. And for YouTube purposes, I literally just go in to YouTube and post the episode directly. So I like Blueberry for that reason. Libsyn has been around for a very, very long amount of time. Anchor is pretty solid. Some people seem to like it. I've never used it, and Buzzsprout as well. Some people in the questions are mentioning the features that Buzzsprout has, where it has some audio soundbite features. That's part of where that question came from. So if that's something that you're going to use, by all means, use Buzzsprout. I think these five in particular, and maybe Castos as a sixth in here, are probably the same in terms of quality. But I personally like Blueberry a lot. And again, they provide a lot of resources to support podcasters kind of growing as a community. Most of them do anyways, but all right, addressing a couple of questions that have popped up. Can you have a blog and a podcast on a WordPress site? I blog and do podcasting. I believe so. Yes, you can. I don't see why not. If I go into my Self-Made Strategies WordPress site, it's a WordPress site. It's just a blog. So I could technically create a blog post that isn't a podcast episode. Now, in my particular instance, I don't do that. All I post as blog posts are the podcast episodes. So every time I post a new blog post entry, I literally drag and drop. There's a little Blueberry plugin on the page itself. I drag and drop my episode into it. It uploads it into the hosting platform, makes it public, does the whole thing it has to do. My RSS distribution's already set up within my dashboard. So then all I have to do is add my show notes as a text-based version of that episode. I schedule the episode for Thursday morning for release. It takes care of everything else. It has been very, very good. If someone, here's another question. If someone downloads a podcast from wherever they can listen in a car, regardless if it's video originally, or do you produce two types of podcasts, a video version and an audio version? Great question. So last week in the editing session, we talked a little bit about this, but I'll hit it again. I edit it all in one shot, okay? I've shut down DaVinci, so I won't bring it back up. But as you saw at the beginning, my editing process is audio and video gets edited all together as one. Then when we go to the deliver page at the end of the process, we hit deliver. And what we do then is we render a audio only version, and then we render a video version. So we do pump out, if you will, two versions. The audio only version gets posted to the blog, including through Blueberry. And that goes out to all of the directories that we talked about. And the show is literally, as far as I know, it's on every directory that I've ever looked for it on. And then we go to our YouTube channel and we just post the video version there. So if someone's listening to your podcast, if they're listening to it on my website, or if they're listening to it on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever, that's audio only. If they want to watch the video version, they have to go to YouTube and do that. Now, they can do that certainly on their computer. They can do it on their phone. They could do it even from their smart speaker. They can ask Alexa to play Self-Made Strategies. I'm fairly certain that'll work. I think I tried it once and it worked, and that was good enough for me. I never went back to make sure it was working again. But I believe that aggregators like that also pick it up, and it's all set up for you. Okay. The name of my site, and it is on the PowerPoints, by the way, is just selfmadestrategies.com. It's all one word. Or at Self-Made Strategies on Instagram. You can find us there as well. And Self-Made Strategies, all separate, 3 separate words, if you're looking for the show itself on any of the platforms that we mentioned. So if you have WordPress already built out, you would need someone to help you put the PowerPress plugin into the site. Again, I would recommend, if you're on Fiverr or if you're talking to someone, I will give you one secret sauce tip here. Make sure that whoever you're talking to, no matter how specialized in web design they are, they know what they're doing with PowerPress. Trust me when I say I've had multiple nightmares with web designers who said, oh yeah, we got it, no worries, PowerPress, sure, we got it. And then when it came to integrating PowerPress, the truth came out. It was a total train wreck. They had no idea what they were doing. And it is, as far as I understand, a plugin that gets integrated like other plugins, but there are settings that you have to tweak, and you have to integrate everything with Blueberry. It can be difficult for the uninitiated. So you want to look for people who are specialized in this space, most likely, or at least be hyper transparent that, make sure that they read all of whatever they need to read on Blueberry. I've had plenty of people say, yeah, I got this, and then fall flat. So just caveat emptor on that aspect. I'm not taking anything away. I won't mention who the web designers were here, but I had at least 2 bad experiences where we had to essentially ask for our money back and have the site redesigned, unfortunately. So, okay, RSS feeds are the name of the game here. Basically, what happens is when you're posting your podcast to your hosting platform, okay, so if I'm posting it to Blueberry, for example, it's going out to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, et cetera, through what's called an RSS feed. This also works for blogs. It's been around for a very long amount of time. It's a form of XML code that you don't need to worry about coding it yourself. You basically drop your podcast into your hosting platform. It will generate your RSS feed for you. Then you go to Apple Podcasts, then you go to Google Podcasts, then you go to Spotify, et cetera, and you say, here's my RSS feed, and you literally cut, copy, paste the code where it tells you to, follow the instructions, fill in the blanks, and your show will eventually aggregate live. That is why, by the way, we'll mention this again one more time, so I'm just going to say it now, and then I'll mention it again later. That is why you want to do an episode 0, though, because I cannot tell you, and no one can tell you, how long it will take for your episode to actually appear, the very first one, to actually appear on all of these different directories. And they're all different. So if you're expecting to launch on March 21st, like I did for Self-Made Strategies, and you're going to put all of your episodes out there on March 21st at 12:01 a.m., they're not going to be there on March 21st at whatever time of day later. And you're going to be disappointed and stressed out. And if you've been telling people, we're launching our show, March 21st, make sure you tune in, there's not going to be a show for them to tune in. So what you should do is, if you want to launch on March 21st, you take your episode 0, which you've carefully prepared to tell people what your show's going to be about, and you take that episode 0 on February, let's say 19th, because it only has 28 days or so, and you go into your podcast hosting, which presumably you've already set up and you're not waiting till the last minute to do. and you go and you put your episode in, you set up your RSS feed, etc. Your episode 0 is there, and roughly a week later or so, hopefully, your episode 0 is live everywhere. And even though you haven't told anyone about it yet, you now have a basis, a strong foundation to then go and say, hey, check out this episode 0 about an upcoming show that's launching on March 21st. And that's your strategy. That's your launch strategy, which we'll talk about a little bit more. So RSS feed is basically what podcast apps and directories, Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, etc., will use to automatically get new episodes. You set it up once it's done correctly and your show is live, you should have no more issues unless you change hosting platforms, which can cause a ripple. Be careful with that. And then you just post your episodes to your hosting platform, and through this RSS process, every time a new episode comes in, it kicks out to those hosting platforms. I will say this also, something that I've learned over time is when I post my episodes, there's a little piece at the bottom that says Apple Podcast specific, like hosting instructions or whatever, where you can re-add the title and you can re-add certain things. And initially, I wasn't doing that because it would automatically populate from the post that I made. But what I did notice, and maybe it's just me, maybe who knows, what I did notice was when I started to actually duplicate and put in that information in the Apple section of the posting, it would become more readily available on Apple quicker. So I do recommend, if you're using Blueberry or if you're using another platform, which when you're posting your episode at the bottom, there's an extra section to add Apple instructions or whatever, do it. It takes a little bit of extra time, a couple more minutes. You're just copying and pasting, but do it. It will, at least for me, has made the posting process better and more efficient. All right, so best practices for posting. And this is really important advice. Again, as I said, I'm going to repeat this until I'm blue in the face because it's that important. I've learned it the hard way. Make sure you have 10 episodes in the can, which is industry speak for recorded, and they're on our hard drives backed up to a second hard drive, and you have them done, completed, recorded. Okay, minimum. That helps you to get ahead of the game from a content recording standpoint. All right, the production aspects, we're a little bit ahead of the game. We've got some lead time. That'll help you to be more consistent. That'll give you a running start. Then you want to make sure that before you launch, you have 5 episodes edited and finished, ready to launch before you launch anything aside from your episode 0, which of course, at this point, you should have edited and finished and posted as well. So you post your episode 0. This is, again, to work out those bugs and issues, to help you get ahead of the curve, to help you to pre-market your launch date, to get some organic buzz going before you go. And then you're going to set a consistent publishing schedule. I highly, highly, highly recommend 10 episode seasons released at a minimum semi-annually. So if you're doing it by what I'm recommending, you're doing 2 seasons a year, 10 episodes per season, and your release schedule is the following. And this is not just mine. I've seen other podcasters talking about this, including the gentleman who does pod decks on Instagram that I mentioned earlier. As you can see, I'm an avid fan and an astute student, as well as a practitioner. And what he recommends is exactly what I'm about to recommend. For your first season, you're going to release 3 episodes on the launch day. And then you have 7 more episodes again, which you've pre-recorded, and maybe even have all those edited before you go. And you're going to then 1 week later release episode 4, 1 week after that, episode 5, and so on until you've released all 10. If you're doing the math and following along at home, 3 episodes day 1, and then 1 a week thereafter is 8 weeks of distribution for season 1. That presumably gives you a month with episode 0, 8 weeks with season 1, and maybe a couple more weeks to repost some of the social media clips that you've made or whatever to do some after the fact organic marketing. That's a nice solid stretch of right around 3 to 4 months of organic content marketing content that you can really leverage for your business, okay? Or for whatever you're doing, your nonprofit, whatever you're looking to do. Or maybe this is a hobby or a side hustle. You're really into crocheting, so you're going to start a crocheting podcast. Whatever it is, that's what podcasting is great for. Communities, right? If I like to crochet, I like to be part of a group of people that also have an interest in crocheting, and we might want to share some tips and tricks or some cool stories, or tell a story about a relative of ours, or someone, our grandparents or whatever that crocheted. Those are what podcasts are for enthusiasts, for engagement, for people who are like-minded and have similar values to join each other, okay, in an engaging way. So that's season 1. Every season after that, season 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, is going to be, now you have a platform, it's out there already. So you no longer need to jump the gun with 3 episodes. You could if you wanted to in realistic theory. But for season 2, maybe you prepare another buzz reel, maybe not necessarily necessary. You also have your episode 0 that you could just repost if you wanted to. And now you have 10 episodes, 1 a week, that will last you 2.5 months. So now you have, again, another 6 months down the line or so. Here we go. We've got another 3-month span of content that we're creating. That is the power of podcasting if you're doing it this way. And this way is relatively less pressure. You have some lead time in between seasons to build up your content, to contact people to be on your show, etc. We're getting a question or a comment real quick in the chat, and that is, if I have done 1 episode a week for 52 weeks, should I now start a new season? I've been doing it weekly, but someone recommended bi-weekly. Any thoughts? Great question, and one that I am currently struggling with myself, if I can share with the group. So I have done 140 some odd podcasts, I think 41, 42 weekly. There was a point there where we did 2 a week, believe it or not, during the pandemic, because we had that much content reported early on in the pandemic. I quickly realized that was a horrible strategy, by the way. So don't do 2 a week. That would be a nightmare. 1 a week is very, very difficult, as I'm sure the individual who's posting about having already done 52 weeks, it's tough. It's very, very tough to keep that pace and to not miss a beat. Again, I've gone, knock on wood, 141, 142 or so, and I have some in the can right now without missing a beat. It is brutally difficult, though, to go that long. I know others who have gone less and have finally given up and said, no, I'm switching to a season system. This is just too much, and I'm not happy. And some who were even very popular Philadelphia podcasts who did that and who had that conversation. I know others. I have someone who I know that's on the West Coast that has done over 200 and some odd weekly. That individual in particular, though, has a partner that is doing it with them, that is doing these shows with them. And the partner does all the editing, and this individual does a lot of the prospecting and pre-production work. So they share that. So if you have a co-host, maybe you could share that. But if you're looking to transition from one system to another, there are ways to do it gracefully. And that is you have to do some soul searching, right? For me, I've still been kind of beating myself up about not breaking the chain, not breaking the link, the consistency of it. And so for now, I'm still having fun enough doing it where I'm going to stick to what I have for now. But that could change. I could get to 150, 8 episodes or so from now and say, you know what? Here's the precipice. I'm good. I've got other shows I'm producing. I need time for that. Maybe I gracefully step into more of a season-oriented version. The way I saw other podcasters do it, and it was done gracefully, was to just make a post on social media to your fans, or to even record a episode, whatever you want to call it, like we're taking a break episode or whatever episode, 52 and a half. You can be kind of, clever with it. And just say on this short episode, kind of like your episode 0, Thank you so much for listening. This has been a totally fun ride. We really want to elevate the level of our content. So we're going to take a break for our own mental health and to find some new guests to really elevate the content of the show. Stay tuned. We'll make sure we let you know, expect, a new season of our show to come out in early 2022 or whatever, right? You could do it that way. And that would be a graceful, not exit, but sort of transition into a different format. I think if you just abruptly go to bi-weekly or monthly or something like that, you have to, again, I caution you more so about your own interior soul searching about whether or not that's going to affect you on an emotional and psychological level. And then what would that do, right? If you switch, are you going to regret it? All of those things. So you really have to sort of think about what this is going to happen and then just make a very conscious decision. If you were going to switch anyway, though, my recommendation would be to switch to seasons. Do a 52.5, or maybe you wait until you get to 60 or 75, right? Because that's just nice rounder numbers if you want. Again, it's about you. It's not about me. And then say episode 75.5. Thanks so much for listening. We're switching to a season format. In 2022, we want to hit the ground hard and running with really awesome content for you or whatever, right? That's cool. And also, everything comes to an end, right? And maybe there's an opportunity to do a new show and you want to transition to that. So I would say don't leave your listeners hanging per se, but drop an episode that says, again, 75.5 or whatever, that says, I'm going in this direction. I'm going to try a new show. Okay. There's a question about if you use Wix as your website instead of WordPress. Totally fine. I mentioned this kind of in the beginning. I'll mention it again. A lot of these hosting platforms, first of all, most of them don't have what Blueberry has. So if you're using Blueberry, that's, as far as I know, there may be others, but Blueberry integrates into WordPress very seamlessly because of the plugin. Other websites may not have that same, other hosting platforms may not have that. So it may just be an embed code anyways that you can drop into your site. But I do know that Blueberry does have that option. Even without the PowerPress plugin, you can just go to your episode that you create within Blueberry. You would create your episodes in Blueberry, then you would take the embed code of that episode and go post it on your website. Again, that would be a little bit more technical with your web developer or web designer to help you through that. But an embed code is not like the PowerPress integration in the sense that I would say most web designers would know how to do that pretty readily, but just make sure. Another question, do you ever re-release earlier episodes like TV does during the summer with reruns? I personally have not. I have, however, had prior guests come back if there was a reason to do so. I have, luckily, again, knock on wood, I've been very, very fortunate. There are some what are called podcast bookers or podcasting PR people who are specific to getting their clients on podcasts. And I've been really fortunate that I've had good, solid relationships with some of those organizations on a national level that have provided me with a good incoming bullpen of potential guests. So I've been really, really lucky. But I will say this, never bring somebody back merely for the sake of filling the airspace, right? That's what most of this was about subtextually, is about building it for the audience. So if it's not benefiting your audience, don't do it because you'll betray them and they'll leave you. So you really want to make sure that if you're bringing back a prior guest, and maybe what I've done when I brought back guests that had been on previously is I mentioned, hey, go back and listen to episode 40 or whatever it was, where Mitch had been with us then. But today we're talking about something slightly different, and here's what we're talking about. And that was Mitch Stoller of the American Association for Cancer Research had been on my show somewhere around episode 30 something. And then episode 80 something or 90 something, Mitch had come back and we did an episode with him and another prior guest where we did sort of a live marketing kind of case study for the American Association for Cancer Research and this marketing expert. who was talking about how a concept called value graphics could help the AACR find more donors. And it was a really interesting episode, but it was unique. It was still stood alone, even though both of those individuals had been prior guests separately. Someone is mentioning that they've had great success with Podmatch to find guests, but needed to do a pre-interview to make sure it's a good interview. That is a very great tip, by the way. So hats off to you for that. Definitely, especially early on, pre-interview the people that you're bringing on. Make sure that you're telling them not to be scripted if you're giving them your outline, which you should, but just tell them not to write a script. And I do recommend early on, try really hard not to do episodes with people that you know at a more than acquaintance level, okay? Because remember, you're building this for the audience. If you have really good chemistry with someone who's been your best friend for 20 years, you're gonna have inside jokes that you're likely to forget to clue the audience in on. And that discussion will be essentially the equivalent of someone coming up to you at a cocktail party and you're talking to someone that you've known for 20 years and not bringing this person into the discussion with you. It will be that similar effect. So I do recommend, just as a tip, trying to avoid that, because that will help you. All right, these slides will be available to you certainly, but again, I want to make sure you're setting a consistent schedule. Consider using WordPress and Blueberry. That's what I've done. I'm not any skin in the game in either organization, but just something to consider. All right, the marketing piece, we have just 2 more slides. I'm sorry, I thought I wouldn't go over and I did. Getting me to shut up is the trick, of course, so I apologize for that. If you ask my wife, she'd agree. From a marketing perspective, the whole point of this is to try to keep it organic, okay? At least early on. I would say the first 50 episodes, and I'm not kidding about that number, first 50 episodes, you probably don't want to spend money on targeted ads unless your show is generating significant sponsor or advertiser revenue, income, okay? If you have a massive audience, I mean massive, hundreds of thousands, which is unlikely, especially early on. But if you have a massive audience early on, and you're again generating sponsorship and ad revenue, then maybe you want to do targeted ads. And if you have that big of an audience, you probably know what you're doing anyways from a target audience perspective. So maybe in that case, but early on, be focused on the organic growth, using this for the power that it can bring to you. And remember the why should I, meaning the listener, care concept that we talked about very early on in pre-production and development for preparing your content for distribution, right? It's the same thing. Ask yourself and answer that question again, because this time you're looking at it from the perspective of preparing the episode from an editing perspective and for a marketing content piece after I've recorded and edited the show. So I may want to use that answer to that question to cut social media clips like we were talking about that you might post to Instagram or LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. Now, part of using this as a marketing tool is to try to get the guests who have been on your show, if you're doing guests, to share this as well. So send them an email after each episode. It can get a little overwhelming. So if you can use an intern, or if you can find a scheduled time every week, maybe you do it once a month to send some emails out. Thank them for being on the show. Ask them for a review on Apple Podcasts specifically, but anywhere else that they'll do it is great. Ask them to also subscribe to your show and maybe to share their episode. You'll send them links to wherever you've posted it. Share your episode with their audience, email marketing, etc. Right? This is your opportunity to kind of grow the show. And again, the really important concept with all of this is that it's highly leverageable content. So you're creating one piece of content that you can then leverage by publishing it essentially everywhere, right? Social media, your email marketing campaigns, if you have that, on your blog, on your website, YouTube, on all of these different platforms that you can post through RSS. That's a one-click thing, right? I post the episode and that's it. I mean, it takes the show notes and all that and really strategic and careful thought in trying to be very focused on producing high quality content, but one click and it distributes to all these listening platforms, right? So that's what you want to focus on long term. I know we went a little bit over. I apologize. I was trying to hit the questions as we went. If I missed anyone, please repost it, but I think I got to everyone. And of course, take down the emails, follow us on social media, email us if you have any questions. Sorry.
No, you're okay. We kind of cut out for a second, so I allowed it to run over. Final note here, I did post a link to a quick 30-second survey in the chat. It is required by our funders so that we can keep offering these workshops. So if you guys have an extra minute, we really value your feedback and would appreciate if you filled it out. It looks like we are all good on questions. So I think we're all set to wrap up. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, everyone. And have a great rest of your evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you. You too.